Hey everyone, thanks for joining the panel today. We really appreciate having you all here. My name is Ellie Flynn. I'm a journalist who makes documentaries for the BBC, and I'm going to be hosting the panel today. So I'm really excited to speak to you all about this. I think it's a really important subject, and I think there's loads for us to get into. So if we could start by everyone going around and introducing themselves, that'd be amazing.
So thanks for you all joining. Obviously, I'm James, so I'm the founder of Heather Wellbeing, put together the initiative to help as many frontline staff as we can, and hopefully this talk today will enable us to scale the message and to reach some people who we haven't reached so far, as well as their friends and family and the general public who want to lend and show support. So it's really to raise the understanding and tips and helpful advice for those who might be listening, really. So I'm going to stay relatively quiet and leave it to you guys who know really how best to help.
Yeah. And then I'm going to sort of come around to, I think, if everyone's in the same order on my screen, I've got Dora Youssef.
Yes, hi. Good afternoon to you. It is a little bit nerve-wracking, I must admit. I agree with you, Kenny. My background, my kind of second career, because I used to teach art in secondary school and then in the college. And then I was really interested, life happened, I was really interested in psychotherapy and counselling. So I did the whole gamut of training, etc., and ended up at Manchester doing PhD on psychotherapy, which also involved spirituality. So these times seem to be very poignant for some people. In addition to that, I was really interested in body work, body psychotherapy. And one of my most recent trainings is sensory motor psychotherapy, which is really focusing on trauma and how the approach is bottom up, as it were, not top down, which is body oriented. And also visualizations, kind of the unconscious. So these times are really throwing up all kinds of resources that people have, as well as the fears. And I used to train people and supervise and have a practice, etc. Thank you.
Perfect, thank you. And then Kenneth?
Yes, I'm Kenneth Day, Ken, when I'm not in trouble.
Get to Ken then.
Yeah. So I had a long career as a nurse. I became a nurse when I left school at the age of 16. And I initially specialised in intensive therapy work. But I left nursing last year, in fact. And the last 12 years of my nursing career were as a hospital-based Macmillan cancer nurse specialist. I was based at Northwick Park Hospital, which interestingly has had quite a devastating period with the COVID-19. And also in the late 90s, for reasons which I later came to regret, I joined the army as a reservist, as a nursing officer in the army. And I eventually was called up to Iraq and was in Basra as an intensive care nursing officer in the Gulf War. And in the latter part of my career, I decided I didn't want to just stop working, so I retrained. I did some extra training while I was finishing my nursing career as a counsellor and a psychotherapist. And I now have a practice in Ealing as a psychotherapist. I'm interested to hear what you said, Dory. The modality I work in is called psychosynthesis, which is a more spiritually based psychotherapy. Yeah.
Perfect, thank you.
And I live in Ealing in West London.
Okay, perfect, thank you. And then Salma?
Hi, I'm Salma Sadiq, and I live in glorious Dundee in Scotland. I'm a psychotherapist and a clinical anthropologist, and I work particularly specialised around with working with diverse minority groups and cultural presentation of mental illness. My background is that I've come from working with a national project as a lead person for ethnic minority mental health and Wellbeing for a number of years, and then I moved into academia, and from which I'm taking a bit of a gap year, and I'm basically working on a number of academic programs for psychotherapy, looking at research and ethnic minority presentation of mental health.
Great, amazing, thank you. And then Lolita?
Hi, I'm Lolita. I'm from Birmingham. I trained as a counselling psychologist. So before that, I actually did a course in computer science, but it just was not for me. I've always been a people person. I've always been interested in psychology, and I jumped into counselling psychology. My research that I completed as part of my course was all around attachment and trauma. It's always been an interest to me, and it still is my area of interest, so attachment, trauma and relationships. And at the minute I work from an integrative model. I also take on board the spirituality side, which I find really interesting. And I also work specifically with the mind and body, and how trauma impacts on both very, very differently, because the body has a mind of its own. And often people, they don't have that connection because they're working just on the mind, and then they forget about what the impact is on the body. So that's where my area of speciality is. And at the minute, I've just been doing a lot of work with NHS Frontline, because again, just what everyone is going through right now is very, very different, and it's all impacting on everyone differently. So I'm just really glad to be here today and to share my knowledge.
Amazing. Well, I'm very glad to have all of you here, so thank you. And then finally, we've got David.
Hey, so I'm a psychotherapist. I have come to it from the business world. I think, I don't know why it took me so long to get back to people. My whole family is a family of therapists, social workers and analysts. But it feels like I just had to go the other way first for some strange reason. Make of that what you will. Some sort of prioritize connection and the relationship in therapy more than probably any other feature of my work. Having said that, I definitely feel the commercial sort of measurable strand or gene still very much driving part of what I do. So I'm very much a feelings person, very much a relationship person, but there is always a sort of practical element to my work. I run a small group practice in central London, and yeah, I have been working with 2 people at the moment who are within the NHS, and who are, one of whom is Frontline and the other one of whom is not Frontline, but very much feeling the effects of everything that's going on. So yeah, just happy to share that with you.
Thank you. Well, thank you so much again, all of you, for joining. We know that these are unprecedented times for the country, and particularly for the NHS. And what does the current situation mean in terms of mental health for frontline workers?
So with mental health for frontline workers, I've got a total of 12 individuals on my caseload at the minute that I'm working with frontline workers, and every single one of them are presenting very differently. And when I say differently, it's one will be like, okay, I know that one of them that I'm working with, they keep mentioning that I just feel like I need to have therapy, because everyone keeps talking about frontline workers needing therapy. She's just sure she's having a check-in, and she's having that time just to check in. But then I've got someone else who's saying that it's like a tsunami that's just come over us, and it's really impacted on us as a team, as just individuals, that they feel like it's really difficult to control situations that they'd normally be able to control. So mental health, I think, is just different for every individual. I know that in the news, the media, they the way that they present it is that mental health, it's needed. But again, every individual is very different, and I think there's also a pressure put onto frontline workers feeling like they need support, there's something wrong with them, or there's something that's going to happen to them. So I think, yeah, that's just my perception of that.
There's almost, yeah, Sama.
I think following on that, I think that was a very helpful way of putting something in a context. I think it's interesting how we define the notion of frontline workers. It's like these individuals are going back home to families and communities, and doing work with a range of people from across many professions, as well as health workers. It feels like there's a growing level of anxiety and stress because of whether the frontline loved one is working in a COVID ward or offering social work services to look after children who aren't participating in the curriculum online. So there's a lot of diverse issues. So you could have two parents who, one could be working in health and one could be working in education, which are equally impacting. And I wonder what that does to the dynamics of the family and the children, and how that stress is carried on secondarily and also within the wider community. So I'm hearing a lot of issues that are really rippling through not only the household to the local community as well. And it's about connection and the loss of connection. And I particularly think it's unhelpful the way our leaders and our politicians are sort of ramping up this idea of optimism. And I particularly like the work, the things that stuff that's been happening in New Zealand as well as in Scotland and in Northern Ireland. And it's about looking at the whole idea of toning down the optimism and looking at hope. And in that hope, looking for opportunity. Because there's a lot of people who are feeling powerless, of not being able to engage or help. And so there's elements of guilt and anxiety around that.
Yeah, and that's something, like you say, that extends beyond perhaps just the frontline worker and into the communities that they live in and the families they live with. Kenneth, what do you think about that?
I agree with what Lolita and Salma said, and I also would also want us to look at this phrase "frontline worker" because from my background, I work both in ITU and in cancer care, but I would say that for the purposes of this discussion, anyone working in healthcare is on the front line.
Yeah.
I've spoken to some of my cancer colleagues recently about how they're coping, and the predominant feeling amongst them is one of anxiety.
Yeah.
Because if we can imagine, particularly again going back to the fact that I worked at Northwick Park, then going into work every day knowing that is an actual, almost a sort of center or a hub of the disease, whether they're in ITU or A&E or not, is such a stress-producing activity. Just simply going about their daily work, there's that added mental pressure as they do that.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's funny, yeah, you're right. I suppose frontline worker is kind of a term that people can take in different ways. To me, I see it as anyone that's actually working at the moment, whether that be in the NHS or in a shop or a delivery driver. That's a frontline worker to me. But of course, it's good to kind of explain those terms and explain what they mean to different people. Dory, what do you think about this?
Well, it's interesting, even the word frontline just depicts a battle, doesn't it? And the frontline battle. So it conjures up all kinds of fear and threat. Excuse me. And the way people react to that depends on the bias of their own capacity and their own trauma. Sorry, I'll just take a drink.
Okay.
And their own experience of trauma in their own background, because all of us have had some kind of, whether it's developmental or any other kind of trauma. But I think what everyone has said, also this feeling that frontline workers, thinking of the NHS in particular, that they feel responsible. You know, there's this clapping. After a while, the clapping on Thursday became a bit uncomfortable because I felt, well, actually, they need PPE. They need things that are logistically and tangibly to help them. So there was a little bit of ambivalence. So I think they feel ambivalent about a lot of things. It's wonderful that we do celebrate and acknowledge, because there is such a lot, as you said, such a lot of work people are doing out there. And I just saw people doing roadworks and they're not wearing anything. And I'm just thinking, what's going on? So I think for people out there, there's a kind of ambivalence, not knowing quite what they should or shouldn't feel. And obviously working with trauma and understanding that, how it can trigger past events and past experiences. People who've had mental health problems as well, how it might resurface. Their feelings of guilt, perhaps, shame, all kinds of things that may come up. Competencies, how competent they feel. And when there is a threat, and I've been doing supervision with someone who had an NHS worker who brought up one of the images, because she works with artwork as well, of herself in the sea with sharks coming around her, and they're getting nearer and nearer. She didn't realise that that was the virus for her, and that was threatening. And she realised that she was actually in hospital working as a counsellor, and she was asked to work in the wards. Well, obviously you're working perhaps with critical conditions as well, and death and dying, etc. And she was so afraid, she was petrified. And working with the counsellor, it facilitated her to have the permission to go to the staff nurse or whoever it is responsible and say, actually, I'm really frightened, I'm too afraid to do it. And allowing her to realise that in herself and come back, and the person who she went to, her manager, said, I'm really grateful for you doing that, because you are one of our stronger people, and we need to acknowledge that people are afraid.
Yeah.
As I said, there's a lot. Then there's a in the brain stem, in the system, there is this fight, flight, freeze mode, which I'll talk about a bit later. But it's so important for people to realise that they are in the throes of this.
Yeah, absolutely. And I can imagine that can be quite difficult at times. And following on from that, I suppose, what are the key areas of support that you think people working within the NHS need right now? David, I don't know if you've got any thoughts on that.
Sure. I just kind of bridged the previous topic, or rather from the previous topic. I just wanted to say I think one of the things that makes this whole situation so unique is that it touches everyone. It doesn't distinguish. I read a great quote the other day, which is COVID doesn't distinguish, but lockdown does. So just looking at the way that it impacts everyone's life, as everyone has been saying, it is different. But I guess that I often hear, I'm sure everyone else on the call has had their own flavor of this, but somebody will say something like, XYZ is my problem, and then they'll finish up after a perhaps 10-minute monologue by saying, but I shouldn't complain because somebody else has it worse. It's the relativism argument. I see people nodding. The relativism argument at play. I think everyone has their own front line in this. I'm a school teacher suddenly to my kids. I'm a therapist during the day, but I had the unfortunate experience the other day of having 3 clients in a row, 9 a.m., 10 a.m., and 11 a.m., each talking about having lost somebody. And, that was when it became real for me in a way that was just different. But when I speak to people who are actually on the wards and in the NHS, I don't know, not to kind of shoot my own argument in its foot, but I think the decisions that they're facing and the reality that they're facing, and to answer your question, Ellie, is, they're talking about having to make decisions about life or death, or, revealing the reality of the situation to families, or losing colleagues. One of my clients is an anesthetist putting people on ventilators in the ICU, and he's saying, I'm losing colleagues. And that just ratchets it up another gear, and certainly puts any complaints that I have about my working day in perspective. So that's just a thought. I think, it's survivor's guilt. It is the moral burden of having to make decisions about, who gets the resources. It's the stress of having to stretch yourself thin amongst a whole lot of cases. I think what they're dealing with is just in a whole nother league.
Yeah. And I suppose for someone who's in that situation, what kind of support is there, or what kind of support is needed to help them through this?
The biggest thing is just a space. We make such a huge, and I think brilliant effort of kind of making heroes of the NHS. And one of my clients said to me, quote unquote, the other day, I don't want to be a hero. I met him originally in the supermarket, of all places. And he said, I don't want to be a hero, and I don't want anyone to come and offer to pay for my shopping, which I guess a couple of people had. I just want to go to work and do my job and feel protected. And he just wanted the space to say that, because I guess, you know, heroes aren't supposed to complain, right? They're supposed to be strong and kind of give the impression that they can continue to take it on a regular basis. So I guess number one, just a space which is confidential and which they can just use as they need. And I guess some sense of connection. I mentioned it in my introduction, but it's in my experience, and I admit my own bias, but it's, you know, it's the best way of shattering that barrier that isolates people. And I don't know personally of a better way of dealing with anxiety.
Does anyone have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I would agree. I think one of the things that I thought about when this question came up was actually giving some relief, in the sense of having space to get away from what's happening. And interestingly, this was, even before this crisis hit, this was an ongoing issue within the NHS, because of the last number of years of reduction of facilities, of staff, all of the issues that we've heard lots of in the press, seems to have been, the screw seems to have been turned very rapidly because of this, that people just are not being able to get away from the constant demands. And I think that's, you know, that might be something for anyone watching who's a manager in the NHS could facilitate in some way.
I suppose sorry, was someone going to?
I was just going to make a quick point that I find it's interesting. The comment that Kenneth made is that you know, there's something quite unhelpful that's happening in these sort of organisational contexts in the NHS. It's this idea of the new normal, that this is the acceptable way to behave and be, but we've known another way to be and behave. So there's something about acknowledging where we've been and where we're at is more important than any other thing. And that's the way we bring people together in connection, where people have similarities and some level of connection and shared experience. And I think all these sort of, this cliche phrasing of trying to capture an experience and an emotion with a kind of a marketing slogan, I think is really unhelpful. And I think it's adding to the clients that I'm working with, it's adding to a level of anxiety and uncertainty, and also this idea of blaming and shaming and naming, because it's like, this is where we're going, and this is the way everybody else has to come along the way. And I think we're all on our separate journeys as well as a collective journey.
Mm-hmm. And I suppose following on from those points that you've raised, what should we then as members of the public be concerned about or be thinking about in terms of how our attitude or the things that we're doing might impact members of the NHS at the moment? I don't know if you've got any thoughts on that, Lolita.
I think there's a level of responsibility that as members of the public that we have, because I know there's been incidences where people are going out of their homes and not following social distancing rules, or staying in not in pubs, in parks, and having picnics. And it really, I think, really impacts on NHS and frontline workers, not just NHS frontline workers, but just anyone who's working on the front line, because they're thinking that we're putting our heart and our soul into the work that we're doing. We're going out, we're trying to move past this. But then we have people who are breaking social norms, social distancing norms, rules rather, because they feel like they can't be at home. And I get it that they need a break. I understand that people are missing their families and they have that lack of connection as well. So you understand from their perspective, but these rules have been put into place to help us all as a community to work together. And what I'm finding is when one individual's like, oh, but they were at the park doing that, then it's someone else will turn around and be like, well, I can do it if they're doing it. I'm doing it. Why should I suffer? And why should I be not like missing out on seeing my family? So then it becomes this, there's like a a rebel sort of like that's happening away from that. But then these NHS work, I keep saying NHS workers, but frontline workers, they then feel saddened by this, and that's another level of sort of pressure, but then also a disheartening feeling that they're feeling, which can then also trigger previous traumas for them, where they've been let down by individuals or things have happened in their past. So I think as individuals away from frontline workers, I think we have a level of responsibility to hold.
Yeah. And Dory, do you have anything to add to that?
Well, yes, there's quite a few things actually about key areas of support as well as the public. Collaboration and community are really important. What we call our social engagement system is absolutely vital to our life, really. And one of the things in trauma or in fear that gets removed as well is choice, having choice about something. Yeah. So just going back to the areas of support in hospital, where there is time, of course, it's going to be quite chaotic, possibly, that perhaps community of staff could come together, even have tea together, or a ritual of some kind, either at the beginning of their shift or at the end of their shift, something that marks the end, is a boundary, marks the beginning of something and the end of something, so they can feel they can go home. I was going to say almost uncontaminated, because when they get home, they completely strip and go and shower. So it's this sort of sense of where's the edge here? So reframing the work that they're doing. It is a context in which we've never been before. Helping also the public to actually really understand, and this jingoism to actually quieten down a little bit. But actually we do appreciate, acknowledge and thankful to what these people are doing, but we also have to take responsibility for ourselves. As Alita said, we have to take responsibility for caring for ourselves, so that, you know, if you need to go out, that you do it in a way that's protective. And of course then you're looking at what a government is saying and what the health scientists and health experts are saying. Should you wear a mask, shouldn't you wear a mask? So there's a lot of choices that we have to make, in addition to what's going on in sort of critical care. And it's about being mindful of the people around you. And I think in hospital or wherever it is, even in the supermarket, that there is this collaboration and new friendships are being made. Yeah. I think even if it's online, and this feeling of we are together in it, all of us, not just you are together, we're together and you're separate because you're working on my behalf if I become really ill. That's not fair. So there may be a real sense of injustice as well as anger. So I think it's really to have this out and to talk about this openly, and say we take responsibility also. Tell us what we should do to help you. Ask them.
Yeah. Thank you. I think that's really helpful. I'm sure that lots of people watching this will need that kind of advice actually, and hopefully will take it on board. I know there's been some talk about concerns that NHS workers who are on the wards, who are dealing sort of day in, day out with patients with COVID, and actually not even just those workers, but people who are working on the front line in various forms. There are some concerns that they may suffer with PTSD in the future or sort of after this. How important is therapy in the prevention of that? Salma, I'm not sure if you have something to say there.
I think I welcome your comment, Ellie. It's significantly important, because they're in a highly pressurized, uncertain environment with differing levels of support. So the idea of therapy is really vital to reducing their PTSD symptoms. However, you need to create a culture in the organization that it's okay to access things like therapy and care. Because otherwise, most in hierarchical organization is, if you go for extra support or extra care, it frames you as somebody who can't cope, who can't deal with things, and somehow magnifies some sort of level of fragility or vulnerability. So I think there's a cultural narrative within the organization needs to look at the way that they're presenting this level of therapy. For somebody who's been in therapy, working in therapy over 15 years, and I've worked with a lot of frontline services, I can see how it's introduced and how it sits within the context is very productive, and it's very, very has positive benefits. But you can't just opt in and opt out. You need to, the organization needs to be committed in the way it presents the service and how it supports it for the workers. And I think one of the other things I want to pick up is the idea of there's a level of responsibility with the social media, and all, because we're hearing a lot of stuff about helplines and support services, and the BBC is doing a marvelous jobs and developing that aspect. But I think we also need some pauses for reflection. We need to hear more voices from the front line, and we need to hear more voices from people who have impacted or feel a sense of isolation around that as well, because we want to try and reduce the case of secondary trauma, because it's just having these messages put out in the media. And I know some of my other clients who are, with long-term mental health issues, they're glued to the TV. We're taking every message from the politician as face value, and not filtering it out and making their symptoms worse. So all these things are important, that we're having a moment of pause and reflection, as well as looking at the way we bring services in, and things like mental health services is an ethical issue of self-care for professionals, and it should be sort of brandished as that.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's a really important point. Has anyone got anything they'd like to add to that?
Yeah, I think what I would say is that there's a couple of things. The first thing is, yes, absolutely, therapy is important, but I would also widen that word as well to what that individual counts as therapy, whether that's rest or whether it's connection with friends and family, whether it's listening to music, whether it's going to the gym, well, going outside at the moment. Those kind of things are vital to deal with what might be a build up within of different traumas and thoughts. I, again, like David, I had a really good phrase the other day, which speaks to the question of agency or control that we feel we're losing. And the phrase was, we might not be able to stop the waves, but at least we can learn to try to learn how to surf. So the things that we're facing, all of us are facing, not just the so-called frontline people, are essentially out of our control. We recognize that, but within our own lives, we can start to control some of the things dealing with our reactions to the situations.
I think that's a really interesting point, and especially that sort of realization that therapy doesn't have to mean going to see a therapist. It can be, seeking help from friends, family, community. I don't know if any of you have any thoughts on when would you advise someone to seek that support, and whether that is support from a therapist or whether that's support from friends, family, anyone that you feel comfortable speaking with. When would you advise someone to reach out?
I think I wanted to jump in on that one, Ellie, if that's right. Somebody said to me the other day, the requirement is do now and feel later. And it kind of reminded me of a comment that I heard from a past client regarding his tour of duty in Afghanistan. And he was saying very similar things. We had a job to do, and it wasn't about how we felt about doing it. It was about getting it done. And when I heard the two sort of sentiments echoed in such different contexts, it did kind of ring a bit of an alarm bell. So I think as soon as possible, and hopefully, it's unlikely, but hopefully proactively, so that people are doing it before they really feel that they need to, because probably by then it's almost certainly too late. There's probably a much deeper hole that they're having to try and dig themselves out of by that point.
And also, I think when individuals are put under so much pressure, what happens is they're in the fight, flight, or freeze mode. So their bodies physiologically they're waiting for that threat. They're waiting for something to happen in that mode. So when they're going home in the evenings, they may be finding it hard to relax. So then they're not sleeping properly. they're waking up and they're still in that adrenaline mode. So what I've told clients is around boundaries and around sort of trying to split the working life from home life. And I know home life is very limited right now because there is that loss of connection. So it's trying for them to then become more creative or to do things such as like reading a book, doing some artwork. But also I know that clients have said that, well, some clients have said, well, if I do start talking and feeling what's similar to what David said, is if they start feeling now, they won't be able to do because they're going to become very emotional. So there's a fear sometimes of if I start feeling, then I won't be able to do because they come away from, they sort of like immerse themselves in them feelings, and that can then bring up previous traumas. So again, I think that's just to be mindful on the individual, and everyone's on their own individual journey and how they're managing the different traumas or the different experiences that are going on for them.
Yeah, definitely.
I also think there's another key is about how much time you spend alone, and it's about connection is really important. And I know that one of the phenomena around Dundee is you can't get any self-raising flour because families are home baking together and creating things together. So in a way, that is a very family-orientated therapeutic practice. Or there's Zoom quizzes or Zoom baking competitions. So there's a sense of, we're social beings and we need contact, and about reaching out and creating relationships is very vital at this time.
And I suppose following on from that, what would be any of your general advice in terms of well-being, not just in terms of seeking therapy, but just sort of keeping your mind and your body healthy at these times if you are struggling, whether you're on the front line or not?
I was going to actually talk about, if that's okay, about the trauma perspective. And in sensory motor work and in many literature, actually, like my sort of academic background as well, is there's a concept called the window of tolerance, and that we're in this particular window, and above the window we become hyper aroused. Below the window of our own tolerance, become hyper aroused, and in hyper, that's a fight flight. Really got to get in there, but it can be activated so that the person is dysregulated. They could become overworked. They could take drugs. They could overdrink. They could do all kinds of things to help themselves get better. The other kind, hypo, is where there is complete helplessness, collapse, and defeatist, meaninglessness. So there's a real drive. It depends on our bias when we've got a threat, which way we go. So it's to try and get people into their window. And there are so many things that can be done from a body-oriented point of view, because there is the fight flight, and then there is freeze that Alita talked about. And in the freeze also, which links to what we call the vagus nerve, that's what controls the parasympathetic nervous system. So the sympathetic nervous system is the thing that gets you into the adrenaline, the cortisol going, so that you go and do your work, you go and do the thing. But we need the other one to calm us down. And if it's not calmed down, then we don't sleep, we're erratic, our cognitive functions are shut down because it can't get through. So the body-oriented work is that's the way to get through the vagus system into the cognitive thinking. Otherwise it shuts down and we become immobilized, and in extreme cases completely immobilized. And in the animal kingdom there's even a condition of feigned death. So if you see a cat running around trying to catch a mouse, the mouse might pretend it's dead, and it's possible the cat walks away because they don't want to eat it. But it's our ancient primitive survival system, and the way to enable that to work is that what they call the polyvagal theory, is that you get the social engagement system going, which I think Celine's talked about as well, is that we need each other. And part of that also is noticing. So bringing ourselves to really be mindful. This mindfulness thing is ancient, but actually being mindful, what's going on in my body? Where is it? How can I resource myself? So resources are incredibly important. Whether it's a piece of music, a picture of your mum, or your pet or something that really resources you. And even physical, when someone feels perhaps they're becoming activated, your hand on your heart and your belly, because those are the areas where the gut feeling and your heart really do respond. And helping what we call oxytocin to come through, to begin smiling. And I know this hyper optimism is a little bit difficult, but actually perhaps understand this will end. This will end at some point, it will end. And allowing yourself to breathe. So everything is in the breath. The exhalation of the breath allows the parasympathetic system to calm down. It's known. You can do meditation, yoga, cartwheels, whatever is your thing, but certainly exhalation into the sea. And before going to bed, making sure the temperature of your room is fine. You're not constantly obsessed with what the news is saying. Switch off and make yourself do it. Switch off. Mm-hmm. Engaging with people socially online. Self-touch, that's oxytocin. That's what babies have. Heart rate, calming. Appreciation of this vehicle that we are inhabiting ourselves, this body. And allowing nature to speak to us, be out there, you know, even if it's a potted plant, you know, the miracle of it all. And for some people, their faith and their spirituality. What does this mean? What is this virus saying to me? What's it saying to the rest of the world? There's so much beautiful stuff out there. Some of it's not so great, but there's stuff actually you can find that will lift you.
Absolutely. Kenneth, do you have something that you... Sorry, Kenneth, I sound like I'm telling you off there. Do you have something that you'd like to add there?
Yeah, I'd like to, you said about suggestions for general health and well-being. When I came back from, it's about 10 years ago. So I was, as I said in the introduction, I was in Iraq for a short while as a nursing officer. When I came back, to be honest, the mental health support that we received was woeful, virtually non-existent. Now, I believe that the Army has improved somewhat since then, but I'd like to point people to a really very good resource online, which is on the Help for Heroes website. And they've produced something called a field guide to self-care. And it very straightforward suggestions for care with our bodies, with our emotions, and with our mind. And there are videos attached with each section, and there's a workbook you can download. So I would really suggest something like that. Another really good organisation I could signpost people to who work with NHS staff through burnout is an organisation called Sacred Space Foundation, which have a retreat centre in the northwest of England. And that's run by an ex-professor of nursing who is a good friend of mine. Obviously, all of such work is now online as well. But those two resources, and of course things like the Calm app, Headspace app, those kind of things are really very useful for just decompressing after shifts and things like that.
Definitely.
And of course, I have to say the free therapy that's offered by Heather Wellbeing at the moment for NHS people.
Great, thank you.
Could I recommend some site as well?
Yeah.
Working alongside Heather Wellbeing, I've also recommended capacitor.org. It's an international agency that work in conflict zones and areas and mental health issues for diverse communities and societies, and looking at very culturally appropriate contexts of self-care and nurture. And they do things like finger holds, the sort of Tai Chi and different sort of things. And they have a manual, and all their information is free to download. And it's called capacitor.org.
Okay, amazing. Thank you. I'm sure lots of us now have friends, family, loved ones who are working either in the NHS or in the frontline in some other way. What should we be doing to support them and to help them at this time?
Well, I think a word that's been mentioned a number of times in this session is connection. Most people have said that, and I think it's just keeping the lines of connection open. I think that just literally, and that might be, as has already been mentioned, baking a cake, or having a Zoom party or something like that. But I think I think it was Salma that said we are social beings. We need to have connection with other humans, and I think that would be a major suggestion from me.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's key. Lisa, do you have anything you'd like to add there?
It's giving them space as well, and it's not space for them to talk about things that they're going through within the workplace, but also just a space to catch up about like, again, connection, but not catching up about, oh, what's going on at work, or tell me more about what's happening, or what's it like, what does it feel like, because they're stepped away from work now, and they may just want some space to catch up with normality or real life things. So that sense of connection and appreciation as well. So yeah, okay, if you've made if you're making some food, make a little bit extra and give it out to people that that are working on the NHS. I keep saying NHS, but on the front line, because again, it's just that appreciation, and they may not have the time to be able to cook for themselves or even go shopping, so they know that they're being looked after, cared for, and I think that goes back to being nurtured, and the appreciation, connection. It's all connected together.
Yeah, definitely.
I would also say, linking on Dory's point about tolerance, and tolerance comes from routine, and there's something about embedding routine in people's lives where they have regular connection with people, because we're in a time of uncertainty and disconnection. So there's something about routine. It's important.
Yeah, is that sort of setting up a call at a certain time maybe, or yeah, I think they're all really helpful points, and I'm sure lots of people that are watching this will have people that they would like to support through this. So I think hopefully that'll all be really helpful. We do have some questions from some of the followers of Getahead that the audience have put to you guys. So I'm going to move on to those now. Does anyone have anything that they kind of feel like they've not covered that they'd really like to add?
I think just ask people what they want, what they need, want them. Ask people.
Yeah, I think that's something you forget to do sometimes. I think that's a very good piece of advice. So we've got a question from Ellie here, who says, what advice would you give to someone who fears that a friend or partner working on the front line is suffering but is not seeking help due to demand? Do you have any thoughts on that?
I would say go in and find them. If you think that there is any kind of awareness around their isolation or their relative silence or their stress levels or perhaps their lack of connection outwards, which is atypical from what it would normally be, is don't wait for someone to ask for help, rather go in and offer it. And something which I don't think has been touched on, but just to mention it, it's one of the biggest fears is that exactly from this question that people don't reach out, and that in the worst, God forbid, but the worst case scenario is the next time that people hear about them is when they hear like really bad news that perhaps they've committed suicide or something like that. There have been cases, I haven't encountered any personally, but I mean I've certainly read about them, of people on the front line basically saying we can't cope, but that will touch everyone in society for their own reasons, finance, loneliness, bereavement, for so many different, just even the uncertainty or the isolation of lockdown. It's I think if people find that someone's missing, go out and look for them.
Thank you. I think that's really helpful. Does anyone else have anything they'd like to add there?
I was just thinking about the whole issue about organisational responsibility. That they should be built-in breaks. They should be built-in management, keeping a sort of watchful brief over their workers as well. And there's also this idea of putting some level of value into what people are doing and acknowledging on a regular basis. So giving them positive strokes for their way of working as well. So I think there's a lot of aspects of that. I think it's very easy to jump to therapy because there's a danger of the double bind of blaming the person for the issue as well. It's about how do we create an environment of nurture and care and say, you matter. That's why I'm coming to you, and sort of saying to you, what do you need? And I think Dory said the most helpful thing about ask them what's going on for them, or what level of connection they need. So I think we forget that in a very pressurized environment, it's quite easily in a hierarchical organization to get getting into a dynamic of bullying or experiencing bullying because the pressure and the demand is so great. So it's going back to first principles of, about what does the person need and how can you be in contact with the person, and then everything else will evolve from that.
Thank you very much. I'm sorry,
thinking, even just very quickly, even thinking about afterwards as well, because for some people, maybe a loss of income, all kinds of things, maybe even worried about the home they're living in. Actually, what about afterwards? There is a continuity, and the care goes onwards, and it doesn't just stop.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess following on from that, we have a question here from James. What are the signs that people can look out for that might suggest somebody's struggling? Melissa, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that there's always like alarm bells, or there's always warning signs that might come up where someone's picking up calls, or someone's not responding to messages, or when you have spoken to them, they've said things about they're struggling with sleep, or they're again having symptoms of remembering events that have happened or not being able to switch off. So it depends if you're having contact with that individual and you're noticing that there is a change, but naturally there will be a change as well. So it's again the individual understanding, is this me that's seeing that this person needs X, Y, and Z, or seeing that this person isn't right, because we are in a different situation. So naturally the individual who may be on Frontline is under pressure, so they might be presenting differently to the way that they are. So again, very similarly to what Salma said and a few others have said here, it's about asking that individual, like, okay, is everything okay? I know that you said that you haven't been sleeping, or I haven't heard from you for a while, just checking in, is everything okay? So it's just that individual having that sense of, okay, let me just check in with myself, let me just notice, but you're presenting to that individual that I haven't heard from you for a while, or I know that you mentioned about sleep, do you feel like this is an issue for you right now that you may need some support in?
Can I just tack something on that? Because there's a few people that we've heard from directly, and I think it's quite important to ask for the reason that a lot of people are purposely trying to hide the fact that they are suffering. So although they may well be keeping their, social facade up very well, and to their boyfriend or wife or whatever, they may well not know. So to echo the point which you've all actually made, is really to ask and to be quite forthright within that. And I think hearing from so many people as we have, it's a much better mistake to ask somebody and be wrong than to not ask somebody and for them to suffer within silence. So I think that's a really important thing just to...
I think there is a little gentle way of doing that, because maybe some people might find that too awkward. But saying, actually, what comes up for me in all of this, what I'm experiencing is X, Y, Z. How about you? So you actually disclose how you are, so that the other person doesn't feel different or less than or whatever. It's what's coming out as someone working online. It's a different kind of work. It's more intense in some ways, and things come up for me too, because I've got family as well. So sharing that to a degree. You're not a therapist, so it's okay. What comes up for me, in some cases it's still okay. What comes up for me is actually fear. I can feel it in my gut. How about you? I'm finding I'm watching all box sets. I'm finding I'm drinking too much wine or something. And that gives them permission to open up, perhaps. It might help.
I think the
I was just thinking about there's a terrific course that was run in the NHS and in the local authorities. It's a mental health first aid, and I'm sure it's available online. It's about supporting people with mental health distress, potential suicidal feelings, and it's to ask how to ask the right questions and how to offer the right support, and not just to jump in right there. And the other issue I want to sort of raise is the murkiness of the people who are working in stressed environments are going back into the home context, and there's issues to do with domestic violence, psychological bullying and everything else that's happening. In the media, you already see there's a 40% rise in issues to do with domestic unsettlement and people leaving the home. So there needs to be some sort of a community-based, and it's not enough to be asking the NHS worker. It's about showing some concern for the whole family in the context, because it's a community of people who are holding that frontline worker together, if you see what I mean.
Yeah, I think that's really important, and I will see if we can try and get all of these services that you guys have signposted, even links or something when this goes out, because I think there's a lot of helpful resources that hopefully we can try and get out to people who need them. I'm conscious that we're nearing the end of our time here, so I just want to ask one final question, which is from Amy, which I think maybe, I don't know whether you want to answer this, James, or someone else, but are there any support services available specifically for NHS staff?
So I'm happy to answer that myself. I think it's really important, first and foremost, that where possible, sort of with the more day-to-day stress and feelings that people have, they do speak to their friends and family about it right away. We are sort of, as an initiative, there for those who want to talk with a professional therapist. Everybody who's joined the call now is part sort of the team of 260 plus therapists volunteering their time to help, and they are there to work with you free of charge for 6 sessions to get you past this initial challenge you might be facing. There are charity phone lines, there are the resources which Ken and Salma mentioned as well. So there is lots of free, professional, good support there to help. And I would really say, regardless of what support you do choose, just know that there is support there to help, and it's much better to reach out for support than to remain silent and suffering by yourself, because it really does make a huge difference, and problems can build up, and that's the number one thing we want to avoid.
And I think one person's mental health is everybody's mental health.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's, you know, we don't experience mental health in isolation. It impacts other people. So it is vital that we reach one person that reaches many.
And I was going to say also that people can reach out to therapy or whatever helps them without feeling that they're suffering. They don't have to be in trauma. It's about actually talking to someone and having space. And I just wanted to say quickly, because I didn't say at the beginning, that I live in Essex. I'm at the end of the Central Line and used to train wonderful people at the University of East London. So it's just a little bit in my background. But yeah, there's a lot of good people out there waiting to help.
Yeah, and thank you all so much for the work you're doing and for your time today. I think this has been a really informative session, and I think that there'll be lots of people who'll be able to take a lot from this. Are there any sort of final points that anyone wants to make? Is there anything, you know, just, I suppose, you know, a lot of you have mentioned that the main thing is just sort of reaching out, however that might be, is trying to take that step and trying to reach out to someone. Is there anything that you'd like to say to someone who thinks, I don't know how to do that? Sort of maybe any kind of just advice in taking that first step?
I think I would echo something that I think Salma's said on a couple of occasions, is that certainly if you're working in any kind of an NHS organisation, I would be speaking to my immediate manager and asking for some kind of clinical supervision. Fortunately, as Macmillan nurses, we received that on a monthly basis, and it was so useful. And this really should be, I think, a duty of care issue for NHS organisations. So I would be going to my immediate manager and saying that you know, as NHS workers or as council workers or as bus drivers or anything, that we want some kind of venting system or supervision or support along these lines.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone, for taking part. We really appreciate it. It's been a great session. I feel like I've learned loads. So I think that hopefully everyone that watches this will feel the same.